It seems like forever since Miyoo released their last handheld, the Mini Plus. And after endless teasers and leaks, the Miyoo A30, formerly the 282, is finally here. Originally believed to be a horizontal candy bar take on the original Mini, the A30 brings big changes like a more powerful chip, an analog stick, and a major screen issue that, well, you'll have to wait and see about that. By the way, for this video, I did purchase the A30 myself, and it's not sponsored by anyone. All my views and opinion are of course my own. First impressions first, the A30 comes shipped in this fantastic little carrying case. It's very sturdy and high quality, a great fit, and the zipper itself is just adorable. I absolutely love this case, even though it kind of triples the thickness of the device in your pocket or bag. So here's the A30 itself, and it is quite the striking device, especially in this red and gold Nintendo-inspired retro colorway. In fact, all of the colors that I've seen of this device look absolutely great, especially the black. Shoot, I kinda wish I'd gotten the black. The first thing I noticed when getting this out of the case was the faceplate. It's actually made of metal with a brushed texture. This is a really premium design point that I absolutely did not expect. I think in general Miyoo aced a really smart retro design here. In the center, you're going to see that 2.8-inch recessed screen. That is really small, but of course this is a micro device, so it's expected. Speaking of micro, the body here is just 127 by 58 by 15 millimeters. Really tiny. And in fact, it's only a fraction bigger than the original TrimUI Smart, even though it has a bigger screen and bigger controls. That's right, the controls here are actually the same size, more or less, as they were on the Miyoo Mini. And that means that you get a practically full-size D-pad and face buttons, which is really impressive on such a small device. The face buttons here are actually bigger than those on a Nintendo Switch Joy-Con, which is really impressive actually. Also on the front, you're going to see a single Nintendo Switch-style analog stick, a front-facing mono speaker, and the start and select buttons. And just to get this out of the way right now, I cannot stand that select is above start here. What a nightmare. Okay, fine, it's not a huge problem. Up top there's the inline shoulder buttons with a very rounded profile, the home button, a USB-C port for charging only, and the volume keys. On the right hand side there are LED indicators and a power button. And on the bottom you're going to see a micro SD card slot, with cutouts for easy access. And I'm very thankful I don't have to damage my fingertips getting this SD card out like I do on certain other devices. The back of the A30 is completely flat and empty other than the information labels. And unfortunately the plastic is a little bit of a fingerprint magnet. It's not the worst I've seen, but it's definitely noticeable after a little while. All in all, I would say that the Miyoo A30 feels pretty great in the hands. And it looks great too. It has a simple and yet somewhat playful design that also has an air of quality about it. It's fairly light and impressively compact too. Of course this is definitely going to be too small for some people, but if you're in the market for a micro handheld, this one looks and feels pretty great in the hands. So let's go ahead and power it on. Which for some reason takes a full 5-second press of the power button. What the heck? You'll be jumped into Miyoo's stock OS, which is just about serviceable. Honestly, the biggest problem with this in my opinion is this ugly and unfitting robot theme. You can go in and change the theme from the settings menu, but for some reason the console list is stuck with these ugly icons and colors. Now I could probably fix this by tinkering with the SD card, but for now this is what you get. I hope this is fixed in a software update at some point. Anyway, like I said, the operating system is serviceable, but that's pretty much it. You have your recents menu and your favorites menu. And then the games list is kind of for supported systems, that is, your mainstream stuff that works well. The RetroArch section is more for experimental emulators and cores. From the apps menu, you can enable USB mass storage, only it doesn't really work. In my experience, if I copy anything to the SD card through this, those files and whatever will just not appear on the SD card in reality. This is the same issue I had on the TrimUI Smart Pro. Weird. You also get access to launch RetroArch without a core or game. And this is great for setting up your configuration files. And setting up features like retro achievements, which do work by the way. In the settings menu you get lots of stuff to customize your experience. You can test the inputs, you can calibrate the analog stick, and you can remap your keys. Everything except the start and select button. You can also set up your Wi-Fi, although the keyboard is a little bit funky. You press R to change the type of keyboard you have, but that also erases the letter, so you have to go back through them instead. Whatever. Also in the settings you can adjust your volume, brightness, screen characteristics, themes, and even change the CPU frequency. This is useful if you want to lower power consumption when you're playing lower end games to get better battery life. Pressing select on the main menu will bring up a very useful search feature. If you go into a specific system, you'll search for games just in that system. It's a very good search that works very well. After choosing a system, you'll get to the game list, which looks nice and displays box art. And you can press right to bring up a bigger preview of the game. On this list, you can press the X button to select a specific RetroArch core with which to launch the game. And pressing the home button will let you add it to your favorites or remove it or delete the game entirely from the device. When you're in-game, pressing the home button will bring up an in-game menu with easy access to saving, loading, and even netplay. Although that's only local netplay over Wi-Fi. Selecting native menu will bring up a full version of RetroArch with all the settings that you would expect. I actually really like this system of an embedded menu for simple functions but RetroArch under the hood. It worked well on the Miyoo Mini and it works well here. I think you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get a consistent experience in every system, but also the ultimate functionality of RetroArch. However, there are lots and lots and lots of loose ends in the software. Game scanning takes forever and cannot be cancelled. RetroArch crashes often when you change settings around and especially when you save configs. The aforementioned themes are broken. In certain RetroArch menus, there is garbled text and missing symbols. The operating system here just feels really undercooked and very scrappy. And if you're just doing simple stuff like jumping in and out of games, it's kind of fine. But as soon as you start to tinker with it under the hood, it starts to fall apart pretty quickly. In fact, the software here feels a lot like a Trim UI device I reviewed recently. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence and there's nothing else going on here. One element of the A30 software experience that frustrated me is that there are no hotkeys defined out of the box. This means no quick access to fast forward, FPS toggle, or one-button save states. And if you do set up hotkeys in RetroArch, it will kind of mess up the home button and the embedded menu. So it's just kind of an annoying experience. What I ended up doing was setting the hotkey enable button to the home button and menu toggle to X. That means I can still bring up the menu with home and X, while still having access to hotkeys. It's kind of an okay compromise for me. Now of course I can't close out a Miyoo software section without talking about custom firmware. And at the time of writing there isn't any. And in particular there's no Onion OS. And since this is running on a completely different chipset than the Mini and the Mini Plus, it's unlikely to be a simple job for the Onion developers to get it on here. If it's possible at all. We'll return to this thought a little bit later. But bear in mind that for now we're stuck on the stock software. So let's jump into a game and look at the controls. And like I said earlier, the controls here are large relative to the device's size. Just take a look at the stark difference between the A30 and its competition, the Anbernic RG28XX. Starting with the D-pad, it is broad and soft, and it has a lighter push, much like the original Miyoo Mini. And in general, I think it feels really good. It is a little bit loose though, and does suffer from a little bit of cardinal drift. If you take a look at Scrooge here, you'll notice that he's crouching a little bit as I move the D-pad left and right. However, actually on this D-pad, most of the drift is on the up and down directions, not the left and the right directions. This means that the D-pad is pretty good for platformers, but a little bit slippy for top-down games or something like Crash Bandicoot. But I personally wouldn't say that this is to an unacceptable level. And while I've been playing the device, the D-pad has brought me nothing but joy. I think a big part of that is that the D-pad is so big that it's easy to keep your thumb in the center of a direction. So you only drift when you really kind of want to. The face buttons are just plain great, and I could leave it at that. They have a nice texture, a good thunky feeling, and an absolutely great size. And they look great too on this one, don't they? The shoulders are similarly great, with a soft, almost silent press. The secondary shoulders are a little bit raised up, but the device is so small that it's really easy to hit either L and R1 or L and R2. It's not a problem at all, and it's very comfortable either way. And the analog stick itself feels fine. It's just a Nintendo Switch analog stick, so you probably know what to expect here. However, and most importantly, it actually works properly and doesn't snap to cardinal directions at all. This means that you get practically perfect 360-degree motion in analog-based games. And it gives you smooth movement in 2D games like shoot-'em-ups too. If this device could play GoldenEye, we'll get to that in a moment, you would be able to aim with no issues whatsoever. And this is absolutely great. I mean like seriously great. I literally cannot remember the last budget handheld that didn't have broken analog sticks. Or single analog stick. For the record, even Anbernic's premium devices are still struggling with an analog stick snapping issue. so it's incredible that Miyoo doesn't have that issue on such a budget device. Overall, I would say that the controls on the A30 are noticeably really good, and the big size of them really stands out as being one of the best features of this handheld, and that is especially when compared to its competition with its tic-tac candy controls. But what about performance? The A30 runs on a quote-unquote upgraded all-winner A33 platform, which, well, it just kinda sucks to be honest. It is actually more powerful than the Mini and the Mini Plus, but not to any respectable or actually usable level. First things first though, your standard level of emulation, the Game Boys, GBA, Game Gear, and Mega Drive all run really well. In fact, you can even overclock the Mega Drive to play games like Sonic Spinball at full speed. It also works well for arcade, Neo Geo, and even heavy-hitter Super Nintendo titles like Yoshi's Island. PlayStation 1 is also locked in on this device, and that's even with high resolution enabled in most games. Of course, high res really isn't required on a device with a screen this small, but it's locked in either way. And then you have access to higher end systems like Dreamcast, PSP, and even N64. But gosh be darned if literally anything actually works well on those systems. For Dreamcast, only 2D games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2 or various shoot-em-ups will work well, and practically everything 3D is too laggy and slow to be enjoyable. The same can be said for N64. Some lighter games will probably run okay, and I really do mean just okay, but almost never perfectly. And more often than not, they just won't play well at all. PSP, whilst already practically unplayable anyway due to the tiny game area and mismatched screen, also performs very poorly indeed, with very few games reaching an enjoyable or full-speed frame rate. Here's how I see this. When compared to the original Miyoo Mini and the Mini Plus, the performance of the A30 matches blow to blow, but for anything higher, it just kinda sucks. So why upgrade the chip at all? I think a much better idea for this handheld would have been to just mirror the Mini and the Mini Plus, and make it completely compatible with all of the firmwares available. Or rather, with Onion OS, right out of the box. Instead, you get this allegedly more powerful chip that only really makes things more complicated, and will probably never deliver anything more than its predecessors or its competition, the RG28XX, which has substantially better performance. Now, I'm not sure how many people out there are dying to play Dreamcast or N64 on a 2.8-inch screen, but I personally just don't think it was worth upgrading the chipset here, at all. One last note on the performance here is that the chip does get pretty warm during heavy use, in stuff like Super Nintendo, PS1 or above, and the device itself does heat up. And that metal faceplate, as nice as it is, tends to act like a little bit of a heatsink, and that means that the front of the device gets particularly warm, which then means that the D-pad and the face buttons also warm up pretty noticeably. It's not a huge deal, but like I always say, if you're sensitive to a warm device, this is one of them. And now it's time to talk about the screen. If you've been following news and reviews surrounding the A30 before this video's upload, you've probably heard or even seen that the screen on the A30 is incredibly dim. And when I first wrote the script for this review, this section about the screen was pretty barbaric. However, literally as I finished writing this review, Miyoo released a firmware update which has completely and utterly fixed the dim screen problem. There are a few angles to consider here. On one hand, I don't think it's acceptable for a device to ship with such a huge problem. But on the other hand, my unit is a part of a very limited first batch of shipments. I don't think the update process is the most user-friendly ever, especially due to Miyoo's slow and clunky website. But on the other hand, it's not super hard to do, and it does completely fix an otherwise deal-breaker problem. I'm just going to do the rest of this review under the assumption that all the devices shipped after this first batch, and hopefully the one that you get if you buy one, will have the fixed, updated software with the brighter screen, because I assume that they all will. And to be honest, the fixed screen issue substantially alters my final opinion on this device, so I feel it's pretty important to cover it. And also, I really like to be positive, and reviewing the screen with the updated software lets me be more positive. Anyway, enough rambling, let's move forward. The screen on the A30 is 2.8 inches, like the original Miyoo Mini, with a resolution of 640 by 480 pixels and an aspect ratio of 4:3. This makes it great for most retro systems as they scale well and fill out the whole of the screen. After the update, the screen gets nice and bright with great viewing angles and vibrant colors. The display itself can also be customized in the system settings where you can adjust saturation, luminance, and others to dial the screen in to exactly where you want it. The screen also has absolutely no issues with ghosting like there was on some of the original Miyoo Minis. And in general, all in all, I find the screen to be absolutely great. Your games look great, it's nice and sharp, even low resolution 3D like PS1 looks completely fine, and I really have no complaints about it whatsoever. And trust me, I am shocked and delighted to say that, especially given that the original dim screen issue was a complete deal breaker. Anyway, while I was playing, I found the speaker on the A30 to be just fine. It's not incredible, especially given that it's mono, but it is truly front-facing and decent enough for general gaming. However, it has a very noticeable buzzing problem when the volume is at the minimum. This is audible if you're sitting in a quiet or silent room, and it's guaranteed to be buzzing if there's no other audio playing. It's just kind of distracting if you like to play your games in silence. And it's definitely not a deal breaker like the screen would have been, but it is kind of annoying. Hopefully they can fix this in a software update too. So yeah, the A30 is kind of a wild ride. So here's what I like and dislike about it in summary. I like the smart and compact design, I like the metal faceplate, I like the fantastic big controls and the proper working analog stick. I love that it's truly pocketable. I think it has great performance for retro gaming. It's had updates that truly make a difference to the experience. And it has an absolutely fantastic carrying case. And I dislike the very buggy and unstable software, at least right now. I don't like the pointless CPU upgrade that seems to have just caused more problems than anything. And as a part of that, I don't like the poor performance above PS1. It really is a pointless side grade, not even an upgrade. I don't like how warm the device gets in the hands after extended gameplay sessions. You'll definitely notice it. I don't like the backwards or upside down start and select, but that's very much a nitpick. And of course I don't like that there's no Onion OS or custom firmware out of the box. And I dislike that specifically because I feel like it should have been possible. So let me share my overall opinion of the Miyoo A30 with you. And my first thought here is that the Miyoo A30 is a far more complicated device than it ever needed to be. For the entire year or so that we've been waiting for this device, all that was ever needed was a horizontal Miyoo Mini. We didn't need a different chip, we didn't really need an analog stick, and we didn't need anything more. But then the A30 releases with this weird unfamiliar chip that performs poorly for anything that the Miyoo Mini couldn't do anyway. And most importantly, overcomplicates the custom firmware situation. This device does have the great big controls from the Miyoo Mini line, but the design itself is just kind of strange and different and a bit overcomplicated in my opinion. I've actually seen an image online of a transparent black A30 that looks much closer to the Miyoo Mini line, and I just think they should have done something like that. In my opinion, the bottom line is this. The Miyoo A30 should have had perfect hardware parity with the Miyoo Mini and the Miyoo Mini Plus, and it should have shipped with Onion OS out of the box. And really, that's the killing blow for the A30. If it did have Onion OS, I think it would have been much better received, despite being weaker than its competition. But because it was launched with a brand new chip that was advertised as being more powerful even though it's not really, the A30 just seems kind of like a muddy and misguided device. All that said though, despite its warts and all, I really like the Miyoo A30. And whereas I don't really want to just pit the 28XX and this device head to head, in this video at least, it is by a huge margin my choice out of these two devices for a 2.8-inch horizontal device. It almost entirely comes down to the controls, but also the feeling in the hands as well. In my opinion, the A30 has a very pleasant, soft feeling in the hands, and the controls are very large for the size of the handheld. By contrast, I find Anbernic's offering to be kind of hard and plasticky, with these tiny tic-tac controls that just aren't very pleasant to use. But there's no denying that the 28XX has better software, and it has HDMI output, and it is by far a more powerful device. But for me personally, when it's come to these two devices, the A30 has won out for me every single time. It's just an incredibly pleasant shape, it's comfortable to hold, and all in all, despite everything that I've said about it, it's just a joy to play, when you're playing something that works well. And really, I just think that the marketing and the expectations for this handheld were just way out of whack. Miyoo were onto a winner with the Miyoo Mini and the Miyoo Mini Plus, but they were never amazing at the beginning. And the A30 kind of feels similar to that. It's just not that great, but there's a huge amount of potential here. And after everything, it's just a super fun handheld. Personally, I'm kind of sad that this handheld has gotten just such negative press so far. And that's why I'm kind of happy that my review is ending on a more positive note. Because in the end, when it really comes down to it, all I want my handheld to do is to play some games and be fun. And I can't say that the A30 hasn't been that for me. As a tinkerer, as somebody who likes messing around, yeah, this device gets really annoying really quickly. But when I'm just kind of in that gaming mode where all I want to do is slip a mini device into my pocket and play it at my leisure, well then the Miyoo A30 is a handheld I absolutely love to have around. I know it's a lot to ask, but I do hope that the Onion OS team come through and create custom firmware for this device. Or, well, anyone really, because it definitely needs it. There are some hints of custom firmware already, such as RA30, which removes all of Miyoo's menus and stuff and replaces it with a really well optimized RetroArch, and the BTN team's work into this device as well. Here's hoping things get better, and also here's hoping that maybe one day, just like the original Miyoo Mini, the Miyoo A30 will have its redemption arc.